Your brain is lying to you right now, not maliciously, not out of weakness, but quietly, automatically, and with remarkable efficiency. When life gets painful, when failure hits, when relationships fracture, when the gap between who you are and who you want to be becomes impossible to ignore, your mind doesn't just sit with that discomfort. It builds exits, invisible ones. Psychologists have studied these mental escape routes for over a century. They show up in every culture, every personality type, every income level. Nobody is immune. The difference between people who grow through difficulty and people who stay stuck in it often comes down to one thing: whether they can see the exit their mind built and choose not to take it. In the next few minutes, we're walking through 8 of the most common ways your brain protects you from truths it isn't ready to face. You'll recognize yourself. That's the point. The first and most recognizable escape is the complete refusal to accept an unwanted reality. Not confusion, not uncertainty. A flat, quiet refusal, often disguised as optimism or resilience, to let new information update an existing belief. A business owner watches their revenue decline for 6 consecutive months and continues operating as though growth is just around the corner. A person stays in a relationship that has clearly ended, still planning a future with someone who has already mentally left. The mind's logic here is almost compassionate in its own way. If I don't accept this, I don't have to deal with it. And dealing with it means pain, change, and uncertainty. All things the brain is wired to avoid. The problem is that unaccepted realities don't wait politely. They compound. The longer the refusal holds, the more expensive the eventual confrontation becomes. Catching this pattern early requires only one honest question: am I seeing this situation clearly, or the way I need it to be? The second escape is quieter than the first, yet often far more persistent. It doesn't reject reality. Instead, it quietly accepts what happened, then buries it beneath the surface. The painful experience is stored instead of understood, hidden in a place the conscious mind refuses to revisit. Imagine receiving feedback that touches a deep insecurity. You smile, thank the person, and move on as if nothing happened. Not because you've processed the emotion, but because facing it feels too painful. But buried emotions never disappear. They return as overreactions, unexplained anxiety, and familiar patterns that keep repeating. What stays hidden often grows stronger in the dark. A wound buried years ago can quietly shape your decisions today, carrying far more weight than it once did. The solution isn't reliving every painful memory. It's creating small, honest moments of reflection, allowing what was buried to finally be understood instead of remaining beneath the surface. The third escape doesn't suppress the emotion, it redirects it. You have a conflict with someone you can't confront, a boss who undermines you, a situation entirely outside your control, a loss that has no one responsible. The emotion is real and valid, but the actual target feels impossible or dangerous to address directly. So the mind finds another one, easier, more accessible, safer. You've seen this play out. The person who receives difficult news and immediately becomes irritable with everyone around them. The employee who can't push back on leadership and comes home short-tempered with their family. The athlete who makes an error and turns their frustration on a teammate. The emotion gets expressed, but nothing gets resolved because the actual source was never addressed. And the people who absorb the redirected frustration are rarely the ones who deserved it. The signal to watch for is intensity that doesn't match the moment. When your reaction feels larger than the situation warrants, ask yourself, what is this actually about? The fourth escape is one of the most revealing, because what a person uses it to say about others almost always says more about themselves. Rather than sitting with an uncomfortable feeling, jealousy, dishonesty, inadequacy, fear. The mind attributes that feeling to someone else. It becomes their quality, not yours. Their problem, not something you're carrying. The person most vocally suspicious of others' motives is often managing their own impulse toward deception. The individual who constantly criticizes others for being irresponsible is frequently struggling with their own lack of discipline. The loudest accusations sometimes point directly back at the person making them. This isn't a universal rule. Sometimes criticism is just accurate. But when a person returns to the same judgment repeatedly with unusual emotional charge, it's worth pausing. For your own self-awareness, the most useful practice is examining your most consistent criticisms of others, not to shame yourself, but to ask whether what bothers you most out there might be connected to something unresolved in here. The costume and the script. The fifth and sixth escapes are worth examining together, because both involve performing something on the outside that contradicts what's actually happening within. The first is building a convincing logical story around a decision that was never really logical. You avoided a difficult conversation and called it strategy. You abandoned a goal and called it wisdom. The reasoning sounds solid, but it was constructed after the fact to justify a choice that was actually driven by fear or avoidance. The second goes further. Instead of explaining away a feeling, a person performs its exact opposite, loudly and consistently. Someone deeply uncomfortable with vulnerability performs relentless toughness. Someone managing profound self-doubt projects unwavering certainty to everyone around them. Both patterns share a common thread: enormous energy spent maintaining a surface that doesn't match the interior. The most useful question for both is simple: what would I have to admit about myself if I dropped this explanation or this performance right now? The answer to that question is almost always where the real work begins. The retreat. The seventh escape is a return, not a progression. When current coping strategies feel insufficient, the mind sometimes reaches backward, not for wisdom from the past, but for the emotional patterns of an earlier, simpler time. Patterns that once worked to get needs met, even if they no longer fit the situation. Under significant pressure, an otherwise capable adult might become unusually dependent, waiting for others to solve the problem rather than engaging with it directly, or unusually emotional in ways that feel disproportionate to the circumstances, or simply checked out, refusing to engage with the difficulty at all. These aren't signs of weakness. They're signs that the person's current resources feel genuinely overwhelmed. The mind retreats to familiar ground when unfamiliar ground feels too unstable. Recognizing this pattern, in yourself especially, is more useful as information than as judgment. It tells you something real. The current level of stress exceeds the current level of support. That's not a character flaw. That's a gap worth addressing. The redirect and the override. The final two escapes are the most constructive and the most easily misused. The first involves channeling an uncomfortable emotion into productive activity. Grief becomes creative output. Anxiety becomes physical discipline. Anger becomes focused ambition. The feeling doesn't disappear, but its energy gets directed somewhere that builds rather than damages. When this works well, it produces genuine growth. The person doesn't just escape the feeling, they transform it into something valuable. When it goes too far, the activity becomes obsessive, a way of staying permanently busy so that the original feeling never has to be faced at all. The second involves redirecting attention away from a perceived weakness by excelling somewhere else. The person who feels overlooked in one area builds undeniable strength in another. At its best, this produces real accomplishment. At its worst, it produces a life built entirely around avoiding one particular truth. The question that separates healthy from unhealthy here is consistent. Are you building something or hiding from something? Conclusion. Here is what all 8 of these patterns share, and it's not what most people expect. None of them are signs of weakness. Every single one of them developed because at some point they worked. They reduced pain. They preserved functioning. They allowed someone to keep going through something that might otherwise have stopped them entirely. The problem isn't that they exist. The problem is when they become permanent, when a temporary escape route turns into a permanent residence, when protecting yourself from pain also means protecting yourself from growth, from honest relationships, and from the version of yourself that could emerge on the other side of a difficult truth. Awareness is the only intervention that matters, not self-criticism, not shame, just the ability to notice, honestly and without judgment, that a pattern is operating, and to ask whether it's still serving you. That question, practiced consistently, is one of the most powerful tools in psychology. That's what Rewire Insight is about. Subscribe and join us every week. See you in the next one.